Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and maybe good night. I welcome everybody to ESCR-Net's launch of this amazing comic, The Power of the 99% to Stop Corporate Capture. For most of us, and I'm hoping that I'm welcoming the 99% because we need your power to change the situation. Now, I'm Debbie Stothard, your moderator this evening. I am the coordinator of ALTSEAN-Burma, and I'm taking a break from resisting the coup that's going on in Burma right now to spend time with all of you to bring together this amazing list of panelists who are going to be punchy, who are going to be sharp, concise, and provoke your thinking when it comes to the topic of corporate capture. And so I'm now going to actually, what is corporate capture? What is the comic about? I'm going to ask Mona to share the promotional video.
La serie aborda la captura corporativa como un fenómeno de acaparamiento social, político y cultural que tiene efectos devastadores en la vida de las personas y, por supuesto, de los pueblos.
This comic series is about the problem of corporate capture, where global corporations, wealthy elite, the 1% as we call them, capture our governments, pervert our democratic institutions, so that they can make sure that government works in their favor rather than in the public interest.
En diferentes episodios de la serie de historietas se visibilizará lo que está ocurriendo con la captura corporativa.
It will also shed light on how corporate capture plays out at the United Nations, how corporate capture exacerbates situations of conflict and violence.
Solo un 1% de la población mundial, la élite económica, acumula gran mayoría de la riqueza de los recursos.
This comic series, it names the problem of corporate capture, and it's a tool for us as global social movements to find a common language for a problem that affects all of us. Our message is clear.
No podemos ser incautos, así que ayúdanos a difundir y a defendernos de este virus corporativo.
Wow. This is not the first time I've watched that video, but I still feel chills. And it's amazing that it is in black and white, because for many of us, the issue of corporate capture is a black and white issue. I wanted to welcome, we have a range of speakers. I'm going to ask each person a question, and each person is going to answer in a very concise and brief way. And if you are going too long, I lost my watch, so I drew a watch on my hand. I will point to my hand-drawn watch to give you a hint, okay? So we're going to start with Bobby from Citizen News in India. Bobby, you've been an active supporter of the ongoing farmer struggle in India, which has been such a tough struggle. Why is this comic relevant to you?
Thank you, Debbie. This comic has come out so timely, so very timely, and so it is so deeply relevant to not just to the farmers' movement in India, but also to other people's movements which are challenging corporate abuse we have been involved with. And it is the 99%. It is we the people who are rising up and and resisting and persisting against the corporate might, which is hands in glove involved with governments for reaping more profits with impunity, with scant regards to people's human rights, equity, justice, and also our planet. So it is more than 3 months now when millions of farmers and their families are camping around the Delhi borders, demanding rollback of anti-farmer laws so that the corporations fail in their sinister designs to take over agriculture, as well as farmers are demanding a legal guarantee of minimum support price. The protest, the farmers' movement is in spotlight since 3 months. But you and I and people have been involved with human rights. They know that these demands from the basic producers of food have been so very long ignored, and it is only in the last 3 months they have captured the spotlight. They not only want to protect their land, but also protect seed sovereignty, the food security for you, for me, for all of us. On one hand, farmers who produce food for all of us, and we can remain alive because of them, are fighting to get the minimum support price, which they do not get. So minimum support price actually is their aspirational maximum support price, because the very few of them get it actually. So this is so unfair and unjust. And on another hand, corporations have minted profits, and also they have minted profits even during the pandemic, during humanitarian disasters. Rich are becoming richer. One of the most inspiring experiences for me, Debbie and friends here, for me personally, is to see how farmers have clearly understood the agenda behind the anti-farmer laws, of attempts by corporations to take over agriculture, to take over the land, their jobs, their livelihood, their water, their access to natural resources, and the might of people power, the sheer strength of 99% is standing up resolutely against those who are hell-bent upon enforcing the anti-farmer laws. Let us hope power of 99% wins. We need a new normal. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And thank you for reminding us that livelihood security for farmers is actually food security for all of us. And this resistance to corporate capture is so important in that regard. I want to now welcome Marta from Comité Ambiental por la Defensa de la Vida in Colombia. Marta, you were one of the stars of the promo video. Now, Colombia is coming out of decades of long conflict. How does corporate capture hinder justice and sustainable peace for affected communities in Colombia?
Hola, buenos días. Cordial saludo para todos. Gracias por la pregunta. En Colombia seguimos viviendo diariamente la socavación de los derechos humanos por parte de empresas que a través de mercenarios, y esto está comprobado, a través de mercenarios están eliminando tanto a líderes sociales como a líderes ambientalistas como a defensores de derechos humanos. Y bajo esta dinámica justamente se siguen desprotegiendo los territorios y por tanto se dejan a la merced de grandes transnacionales. Digamos, por citar un ejemplo muy claro, yo quisiera mencionar a la transnacional Drummond en Colombia, que ha provocado graves violaciones a los derechos humanos, que ha destruido el medio ambiente, ¿sí? Y sabemos que tuvo bastante que ver con desplazamientos forzosos, con un éxodo obligatorio en la zona del Cesar en Colombia. Se han asesinado a comunidades y lo más grave de todo este asunto, con una cooperación de la fuerza pública. Entonces, con este breve dibujo, panorama que les acabo de presentar, quisiera mencionar que cuando esta captura corporativa se da en los territorios y se altera el orden social, el orden político, el orden económico, pero sobre todo ancestral, cultural y ambiental, pues vemos muy lejano ese propósito de justicia y de paz. De manera que sentimos que este trabajo, este cómic, es maravilloso para poder difundir y para poder...
Thank you so much, Marta. It's so troubling to see that despite the official end of war, local communities and human rights defenders in Colombia environmental rights defenders also are still being subjected to the impunity and the violence because of corporate interests. Trying to move to something a little bit lighter, I wanted to also talk about another topical issue, which is about COVID. Alejandra from Poder in Mexico, 7 companies are already producing billions of doses of COVID-19 vaccine, but nearly 70% of vaccine doses administered so far have taken place in the world's 50 wealthiest countries. Only 0.1% of vaccine doses have been given to the poorest countries. So is this gross imbalance of COVID vaccine distribution simply a case of the rich governments being more efficient?
Gracias, Devi. I'm with Poder and based in Uruguay. And I was saying that just, this week we started vaccinating. Uruguay is in the south and it's part of the COVAX system. This tells you a little bit of where we are, in the south. As Debbie was saying, it's not a question of efficiency, it's a question of the power of pharmaceuticals. So corporate capture, as you have seen it in the comic, has also, these big actors playing out very clearly during this pandemic. And the vaccines are, the way they are pressing and using their power. On the other side of the coin, I think, Debbie, that, and all of us have to see this as a momentum, very clearly, where the names of these pharmaceuticals, where everything related of the power of these laboratories is really is public, right? And the call for the vaccines being a global public good is more and more in the public debate, in the public domain. And we have to use this momentum of the UN, the World Trade Organization debates, the calls of ECLAC and other economic councils, the call of UNESCO and many of the agencies, together with the civil society movement, to tap, this very important moment of waiving the vaccines, to create this moratorium, and really tap on one very big aspect in which how the pharmaceuticals, are really using and influencing decisions. And I think that overlooking the states is not what I really want to say, but really looking at what is really in the belly of this beast of the pandemic, which is the control of the vaccines, which is the key for us, living and surviving.
Thank you so much, Ale. I was thinking that we will be talking about that COVID vaccination would be a slightly lighter topic from the assassinations in Colombia and the impunity against farmers and threats to food security in India. But even vaccines and COVID and corporate capture is going to determine who gets to live and who gets to die, who is getting the first round of protection against this deadly virus. I'm going to try and not make everybody depressed, because this comic is about resisting, about using our power as the 99%. But as we try to use this power, we need to know where to focus it on. And this is where we need to see that corporate capture is taking place even in places that we don't imagine. This is why I'm going to ask Ana Maria from FIAN International. Many people were shocked by this comic because it talks about corporate capture in the United Nations. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Devia, and all those who are with us today. In fact, the situation is concerning because it seems to be that all what we see in our territories and in our nations comes from something bigger. And I want to tell you about three experiences, three initiatives that civil society worldwide are denouncing now, and which show how the UN is being captured. The first is the issue of the formalization of a relationship between the Food and Agriculture Organization and the so-called CropLife International. A group over 350 NGOs has denounced, led by the Pesticides Action Network, that the FAO is trying to formalize the partnership that they have with this CropLife, which is the association of the world's biggest agrochemical corporations promoting what we call high hazardous pesticides, glyphosate, paraquat, and others. And these high hazardous pesticides are, in fact, as you say, killing people or destroying the life of people. They are making people sick. And it's what happened in many countries, including in India. This has been expressed by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, by the UN Special Rapporteurs on Food and Toxics, and by the testimonies of the communities we work with. And we think that these agreements show how an organization that should be focused in defending the rights of the farmers and defending agroecology is captured or might be captured by these corporations producing the stuff that is affecting the life of the farmers and of all of us. The second example is about a food summit that is planned this year in September. This is a food summit as it has happened many times in the world, but the difference this time is that this idea did not arise from states as normally or from civil society, but from the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum proposed the General Secretariat of the UN to prepare the summit, and the UN General Secretariat did not consult with our states who represent us in this institution, but decided to do it. And now the civil society mechanism, which is active at the Committee on World Food Security and represents the majority of the rural movements, the peasants, the pastoralists, the fishers, women, agricultural workers, is denouncing that the summit is captured. They have said that they will not participate in this summit because the unbalances of power are so big that they will be just instrumentalized, and they would just participate if people are put at the center, if peasants and indigenous food systems are put at the center, and if very clear discussions on corporate capture and on how to manage conflicts of interest are included in the preparation of the summit and happen during the summit. The third example is about a letter that has been launched some minutes ago, and is about a letter to the UN Secretary General to withdraw the proposal for a high-level multi-stakeholder body, that means a governance, for the digital corporations. And the corporate capture part of this is that this body would be a body led by corporations, where corporations sit at the same level of governments, and even it suggests that they pay for their place in it to regulate the same corporations. So you see, this is now not about an initiative, it is not about a forum, it is not about a specific decision, but it would be corporate governance of digital power, and digital power is what is governing our world. So these three examples, and maybe later I can explain you why that is happening.
Wow, thank you, Ana Maria. That's really That's really concerning, but also a very huge and dramatic revelation. I noticed that someone is trying to explain the difference between a UN summit and a Secretary General initiative. But the reality is that for those of us in the global south, very often suffering under repressive governments, we do expect the UN to function as a leverage or as a balancing factor against this state level power. So it's very deeply shocking and concerning that that our voices don't seem to take as much priority. And that brings me to Shayda from Corporate Accountability. Now, Shayda, corporate accountability and other members of the Corporate Accountability Working Group of ESCR-Net, all of us have been working really hard and strongly in favor of a legally binding instrument to regulate corporate power. And this is one of the important tools for us to be able to exercise and leverage our 99%. Now, do you think this process could be threatened by corporate capture, seeing as how it's already infected other parts of the UN and other processes? I'm saying infected because Martha says it's a virus in the video, in which you are the co-star. So, Shayda, what do you think?
Thank you, Debbie. Well, it certainly does seem that it's contagious. Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, like most processes at the international or national level, we are seeing the issue of corporate capture within the treaty. I would just say, take one step back to say, why does this matter? You know, communities all around the globe have been impacted by corporate abuse, by the types of abusive projects that Martha was speaking about earlier, that Bobby spoke about in the beginning. And the fact is that many people have not been able to access justice or any semblance of justice at the national level. And that's why civil society groups and social movements have been pushing for some sort of binding instrument that could actually hold corporations accountable, particularly transnational corporations, at the global level, and would provide access to remedy. So that is the goal with this treaty. It would be game-changing if it were strong and enforced, because it really is about targeting some of the systematic problems and the legal architecture of impunity, as we call it, that allows corporations to violate human rights with impunity. So as far as corporate capture in the treaty process goes, we can already see that there are several trade associations representing some of the most abusive corporations in the world that are active in the process, that speak every session multiple times, that lobby governments. We put out a paper, I think it was 2 sessions ago, focusing on the International Chamber of Commerce and the International Organization of Employers that have both been increasingly vocal in the treaty negotiations, also around climate change and other international regulations and processes. You can really see, if you look at that publication, some of the big corporations that these trade associations are tied to. And it really begs the question of how they can be impartially engaged in this process. And I think this gets back to the question of multi-stakeholderism that Ana Maria was mentioning before. You know, over decades, corporations have increasingly established their quote unquote right to participate in policymaking processes. But the fact is they have vested economic interests. They have interest in delaying, blocking, and weakening regulations. And that is what their role is in these spaces. And so I think that a big part of what we are gathering together to do is to push back against the normalization of that idea of corporations' role in policymaking processes, and actually reclaim policymaking processes for people for the public interest and say, this should be about human rights. This should be about protection of the environment. This should be about the public interest, not about the narrow financial interests of these corporations. So that's what this comic is about. Hopefully it's a tool that people on the ground can use to explain not only how corporate capture happens in ways that might be familiar to people in their everyday lives, but how it is rigging the game at the highest level in these international processes. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shayda. Shayda, I hope that you can actually paste in the chat box the link to that report you were referring to, so that everybody gets a chance to look at it. I just wanted to remind everybody that there is actually a Q&A box, which is down the bottom of your screen. And I see there's already one question, which I will get to once we have finished all of the other guests that we have on this webinar. So please don't be shy, and you can ask your questions in Arabic, in French, in English, in Spanish, and it will be translated to the people like me who can't read anything except English, so that we will address your question. Don't ask your question in Klingon or any other languages. Anyway, very often we see that corporate capture and the power of corporations in many countries of the South is an extension of colonialization, that corporations the corporations that take a lot of power are actually there because of the colonial era. And that's why I wanted to ask Wesam from Al-Haq in Palestine, is there a link between corporate capture and colonialism? And has the UN done enough to counter colonialism? Over to you, Wesam.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Obviously, there is a very strong connection when you step back and look at the system as a whole. And I think what's good about this comic is that it helps to convey a historical problem in a very creative way, because the issue of corporate capture is as old as the British East India Company and colonialism itself. And it's important to note that 2021 to 2030 marks the 4th international decade for the eradication of colonialism, with most of the territories on that list also considered to be tax havens. That isn't a coincidence. The process of decolonization is not a thing of the past, and the UN cannot treat it as such. There is still much more that needs to be done, and the work around corporate capture and tax havens is an important part of the continuing effort to eradicate the colonialism in all of its forms.
Thank you for that very sharp, short, and pointed intervention, Wesam, that colonialization is not a thing of the past. And we have to keep on the struggle to decolonize for the sake of people's sovereignty. I made a mistake earlier of calling on Ale from Pode and saying she's in Mexico when she's actually in Uruguay, but now I'm going to get it right. Our next guest is Fernanda from Pode in Mexico. Fernanda, please confirm you're in Mexico and not anywhere else, not in Bangkok next to me. Fernanda, how do you see this? How do we see this comic from a gender lens, especially since Monday is International Women's Day and March is Women's Month? Yeah, how do we take this? How do we look at this comic with a gender lens? What's your take on it?
Thank you, Debbie. And I am in Mexico City, actually. And I would have liked to speak in Spanish, but I'll do it in English for interpretation purposes. So just a disclosure on that, a disclaimer on that, I'm sorry. And so I think it's essential to see corporate capture and this phenomenon from a gender and intersectional perspective, as capitalism and patriarchy really operate together. They are kind of one and only system. And the actual heteronormative family is the basic unit of consumption. And also it sustains the, the labor force. And I think that the way capital works, in an expensive and devastating manner affects directly women in all their identities and all their forms. And when corporate capture happens, for example, when states as, duty bearers in terms of human rights don't do their job, this really is, is an extra weight on our shoulders. And it is us women that are, in charge, for example, of mostly in societies of, the care work and that are sustaining life. And this has been, it's deepened in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is again in the surface, and it's as evident as ever. So it is in our shoulders that capitalism is sustained, actually. So the participation of feminist movements in, tackling corporate power, in challenging corporate impunity is essential. And we as civil society know that there is room for all of us in all of our civil society strategies, for the youth, for women, for, gender and sexual diversity, and so on and so forth. So I think that we feminists know the importance of democratic institutions. It has been very difficult for us to build them over the years as societies, as citizens, everywhere in the world, and including the UN and multilateral spaces. And that's why it is essential for our movements to incorporate corporate capture and tackling corporate capture as a part of our agendas, and really putting it forward. So I do think it really connects to what's gonna happen next week in terms of making visible all this extra weight and all the deepening inequalities that have, again, surfaced in the context of COVID-19. And I think it is definitely a feminist issue, to tackle, and corporate capture up front.
Thanks, Fernanda. Thanks for telling us in all the different ways why corporate capture is a feminist issue. I now wanted to go to Esther, the ESCR-Net communications coordinator, just to get the technicalities right. Obviously, we all love this comic. We love the promo video. If not, we won't be in this webinar. So talking to everybody. So what I wanted to ask is, how can we promote this comic, and what is the best way of sharing it?
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I want to share with you is our website, because this comic is available in 4 languages on our website. So I'm going to share my screen very quick here. Can you see my screen? Perfect. So I invite everyone to share and use this comic, because this comic is for social movement, it's for NGOs, it's for academic institutions. So please go to our website and share our comic. Here on our website, that I think Mona in the chat, she shared the links to the different languages. You will find our comic in different formats. So you can navigate through the comic. I'm going to move this here. You can navigate through the comic online. Here are some images of the comic with these strong images that we have. And also we have available different versions of the comic. So you can also download a print version of the comic that looks like this, if you prefer to just print it out. Here, I want to show it because I don't know if everyone here got the chance of seeing the comic. But also, you can download the full series of the comic. no, where you can find all the panels in big format. But the comic, it's not only comics. This first episode, it's not only the comic, because I want to highlight that also we have work, and you can find it on our website too, a background document. This background document that it's also a very, very strong resource about concrete examples of corporate capture in the United Nations. So this background document is going to document, and unfortunately is going to be updated with new cases around how corporate capture is happening in the United Nations. So here in our website, you will find everything. So how you can use this. So I think that, I mean, this comic can be used in different forms. I'm going to stop sharing my computer here. Okay. So if you want to use it as, I mean, it can support your advocacy efforts, but also it can be used as a strong political education tool. For advocacy, and as an example, now we are going to have a lot of opportunities because there are going to be a lot of conferences, a lot of summits. So we are going to have a lot of opportunities to ring the bell and to tell our states and also UN bodies that corporate capture is happening even in the United Nations. Now we have launched the comic during the opening session of the Human Rights Council, but for sure we will have more opportunities. So share the comic, the full comic, the background document, but also even the panels, because we have really strong images, and we believe that a picture works 1,000 words. Tagging representatives, tagging UN bodies, tagging journalists, ring the bell, just bring attention that the collective power, the 99%, is organizing together because we want to stop corporate abuse. Also, if you are going to share this on social media, use the hashtag stop corporate capture, because we want to have the same conversation. We want to engage in the same conversation. So remember, hashtag stop corporate capture. But also, because this is also a political education tool, you can print it out, you can share the PDF version, and we have it in 4 languages, but we expect to have it in more languages. So if you want to use it, if you have different ideas, please just let us know. I'm going to type my email account. It's communications@escr-net.org. So let us know if you want to use it in different languages. Let us know if you have ideas, if you have suggestions, if you have cases of corporate capture in the United Nations, because this is a prayer that this is not a today thing. This is something that we are going to keep building on, and we are going to keep sharing with all of you. So I'm gonna leave it there, but please reach out to us and use it. And we need to be creative, and we need to be strong. So this is a tool for all of us. Thank you, Debbie.
Well, I have to confess, I am a fan of popular culture. And so when I see a good comic like this, my first question is there going to be a sequel? What's next? Mona, answer this question.
Thanks, Debbie. Yes. Actually, the Corporate Accountability Working Group is now working on a second episode that will be about corporate capture of our healthcare systems, which is very relevant to what we're going through today in the COVID-19 pandemic, where you see a lot of countries in the global south, but also within different countries in the global north, there are massive disparities in access to vaccinations and in access to treatment for COVID-19. And if you look very closely at the reasons behind that, one of the bigger reasons is that corporations have for years blocked so many different channels for us to use within our healthcare services, so that it becomes an issue where business is being commodified, and healthcare is being commodified, and the right to health is turning into a business where pharmaceutical companies sees an opportunity to make profit in a COVID-19 pandemic versus ensuring that vaccinations is a public good that reaches everyone at the same time, equitably, and so on. So I'm really looking forward to our next comic episode, because it's going to talk about this issue, this really pressing issue, and how corporate capture happens within the context of our healthcare systems. Like, for example, the vaccine patents that are existing right now on COVID-19 vaccinations, the amount of corporate lobbying that has gone into the TRIPS, which are the agreements that allow for these restrictions on sharing the patents, have been a result of so much lobbying by corporate elites and giant corporations. And also you see as well, there's a lot of revolving doors where, people who are the CEO of company X, is now a representative of country X at the WTO, and lobbying really hard against resolutions that will allow sharing of information on vaccinations and so on. So an exciting episode coming up, even though it's quite angering, but there is a way for us to try and overcome it and push back against it together as well, and we'll discuss that in the comic too.
Thank you, Mona. And I'm going to get back to your last point. But before that, I wanted to come back to Ana Maria. Ana Maria from FIAN International, you obviously triggered something when you talked about corporate capture in the United Nations. And what are our expectations, and what are the ground rules when it comes to the point where the UN engages with the private sector? Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, I would like actually to answer to a question or a comment of Felix in the chat, who proposes to go and look into the rules on engagement with the private sector. And I have to say that we did the homework, and when we got the letter of PAN on crop life, we went to the newly adopted strategy of the FAO. And we noted different things. One thing was that there has been a change, which has even been advised by the evaluation of the former rules, saying that the rules for engagement with private sector should move from this defensive approach of protecting independence and impartiality to something more friendly, to get the resources needed for the organizations to function and to cooperate with the private sector, which means we are moving from protecting the public to selling the institutions, to say in a very caricatural way, but more or less to say the truth through this way. And that means that the new rules, as we were able to analyze those on the FAO, yes, they contain some rules that would be useful for us and that we anyways try to use when we have the allegations against these kind of agreements, but they also have exceptions. So for example, it said that that the FAO has to preserve the neutrality and impartiality and independency, but they can make exceptions. And what normally happens to us is that when we write the letters, two things happen: or the institutions do not answer, or they answer and the rules are done in this ambiguous manner that what is incorrect and contrary to the UN Charter principles appears as if it would be conform with the rules. It's like in the Nazi regime, all what Hitler did was legal because the law was done in a way that made it legal, but it didn't mean that it is fair and just and according to values. So our reading is that these rules are so vague and ambiguous and open that on the end, those who will win are those who have power, because on the end, it's a struggle of power. And since in these multi-stakeholder approaches, public-private partnerships, etc., there is power and balance. On the end, if we are not united, as we say in the comic, it will be very difficult to contain this. And of course, being short, we have to understand that these big UN institutions are huge, are bureaucracies that have many people employed. They cannot just say, states do not pay contributions, so we close and go. And one of the big problems that we have is that our states are not paying contributions, or many of the powerful states are paying what we call the earmarked contributions. That means money that goes to specific sectors. And what we have observed is that, for example, a lot of money goes to the SDGs, which is the same model of private-public partnerships that justify these associations, these agreements, or go, for example, to voluntary and self-regulations on corporate accountability. So the agenda is privatized to these spaces where corporations are protected, and the spaces of human rights accountability and more lacking of funds. And that, of course, helps for this corporate capture where the states retire and the companies enter, same as Marta explained that happens in the territories.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. I know that we could probably have another webinar just talking about this topic, but I wanted to acknowledge that we've received 3 questions. One on corporate capture of the Global Education Coalition, and Fernanda has actually answered that and referred to the Abidjan principles. Zafar has asked a question on corporations funding government or political parties in countries like Bangladesh, and Bobby has replied, and Anam has asked about corporate capture in the legislation, in the formation of legislation, and the fact that politicians, elected members of parliament, their influence is constantly being undermined by corporate interests or even corporate representatives. So, and Fernanda has also replied to that. And so thank you everyone for asking those questions. We are actually coming to the end of our 1 hour for the 99%, but I wanted to ask a general question for all our speakers here, which is, when we talk about 99% and the collective power to oppose corporate capture, what does that mean to you? I'm going to start with Marta, the star of our promotional video. What does 99%, the power of the 99%, mean to you in the fight against corporate capture?
Bueno, gracias. Yo creo que definitivamente ese 99% corresponde a toda la población, a campesinos, hablo por ejemplo de Colombia, ¿no? En este contexto, campesinos, estudiantes, organizaciones sociales, organizaciones ambientales, afrodescendientes, mujeres, y en todo el mundo, pues toda la sociedad que se ha visto definitivamente desplazada y vulnerada por estos poderes corporativos, ¿no? Por las transnacionales que definitivamente han llegado a muchos territorios y, como es evidente, pues los han cooptado, haciendo que la vida sea mucho más difícil e inequitativa para todos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Martha. Shayda, since you are the co-star, what does the 99% collective power of the 99% mean to you, and what does that mean in terms of resisting corporate power?
Well, I think Marta spoke to a lot of it. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind thinking about the power of the 99% was the people who've been most marginalized and most targeted by patriarchal capitalism, as Fernanda was saying, Black, Indigenous, women, low-income families, peasants, who have been intentionally oppressed. And then the other thing that came to mind for me was, in thinking about the power of the 99%, is that it's so easy in the world that we live in today, where corporate power is so entrenched, to feel like that is just the natural state of affairs, but it isn't. And this may be a slightly commodified analogy or way of thinking about why it's not, but one way of thinking about that is that corporations' power, all of their economic resources and might, ultimately comes from us, right? It is the accumulation, it is a perverted expression of collective finance, of public finance that has been fueled into private coffers. And if we were to think about that, then I think we can understand that each one of us has an important role to play in taking back their power, first withholding our own power, and then from corporations, and then mobilizing our power and the power of our communities to actually shift the power structures that entrench that unequal system. So yeah, just thinking about how corporations' power was really extracted from us, from our labor and from nature, and we can and need to take it back.
Thank you for that powerful observation, Shayda. Just to show that I'm not discriminating against men, I'm going to actually ask a final question to Bobby. Bobby, do you think we have the power to stop corporate capture?
Yes, absolutely. And it is we, the people, who have the power to stop the corporate capture. And we have no choice. Even the 1% may not understand this. They also need a sustainable planet, sustainable, solutions, whether it is business, it is air, sustainable food, sustainable agriculture, sustainable water, sustainable life. So yes, there is no other choice but to kick out the corporations from, especially doing human rights abuses, and make sure that the government deliver on the promises and the duties which they have towards the people to the people, for the people, of the people. And I will share a very inspiring quote of Mahatma Gandhi, that he said that it's not verbatim, but this is what he meant, that the planet has enough for each one of us, but not enough for even to meet the greed of even one of us. Thanks to be.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And finally, I cannot resist asking these questions because it's so provocative, talking about corporate capture of the UN. If we see that the UN is captured, why are we still engaging with it? Do I see any raised hands? Anna Maria's nodding. Anna Maria?
I think Mona had a question for Wesam, but I want to say I feel like now in times of COVID, and I am here in Geneva and see how everything happens through videos and there is not real UN. I put me that questions every day, Debbie. And I think we are doing this because the UN is not just the UN. If it would just be about talking to some bureaucrats in the Palais des Nations, I wouldn't do this work. But just because this is the space where we converge. And when you ask about being united, you remember Mandela and this sign. This is a place that allows us to live our values of solidarity, of empathy, of care, of accountability. And since we now have this place, it's like the place is there, but we are embracing it to save the vote. If we don't save it, at least we will save ourselves, right? So more or less in a very metaphoric way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ana Maria, that the UN is not just a palais. And I wanted to also ask Fernanda her take on this question. If we see the UN is captured, why are we still engaging with it? Do you have anything to add to Ana Maria's answer?
Thank you, Debbie. I just think we can't abandon, again, the institutions it took us so long to build. So we should take them back, you know, it's like take back the UN, take back our governments, our state institutions, right? Because, you know, corporate power, I mean, these huge transnational corporations have more power than many of our countries, or, you know, they have more wealth, they accumulate more capital than many of our GDP's countries, at least in the global South. And, you know, 60 of the top 100 economies around the world are corporations. So we should definitely continue to protect our institutions, as they are the ones that are going to protect our human rights in the long run.
Thank you, Fernanda. I'm just thinking of the times that we would all, especially us in the global South, go get the visa, get on the plane, go to a very, you know, usually a very cold Geneva and a very expensive Geneva, all the way to engage. And I'm thinking of what that would have felt like for Marta. And Marta, do you think you want to engage with the UN despite the threat and the shadow of corporate capture?
Bueno, como lo acaba de mencionar Fernanda, pues ha sido una de las organizaciones que durante mucho tiempo pues ha trabajado por los derechos, por las comunidades, de manera que permitir que sea cooptada, de manera que no hacer nada, no resistirnos a ese hecho, pues sería un pecado de parte del mundo, de las organizaciones, ¿no? Dejar las manos abajo cuando vemos que algo tan perverso puede estarse moviendo al interior, ¿no? De la ONU, quiero decir. Entonces, es una responsabilidad de todas las organizaciones del mundo movilizarse y manifestarse al respecto, que es lo que justamente tratamos de hacer con esta serie de cómics.
Thank you, Marta. I am going to ask one final question, final question. Why does the UN form these partnerships? Why does the UN form these partnerships when it knows that some of these partnerships involve corporations that actually harm our rights on the ground? Shayda, Shayda's been quiet. Can I ask you?
Sure, yeah. And I'm sure others will want to jump in as well. I mean, I think that there are a number of different explanations. You know, over the past 50 years, there's been a shift in the way that in the rhetoric and the discourse and the philosophy of governance that people describe as neoliberalism, where, you know, gradually economic elites have been able to erode the power and the way that people view the role of the state. They're calling for smaller and smaller government. They're calling for cut taxes. They're calling for more and more services, including essential services like water and healthcare and education, to be devolved to the private sector. And they're gradually chipping away from both the economic resources that the public entity of government, which was supposed to represent the public interest, had to provide for its citizens. and also the political power of governments, to the point where governments are even handing over the little power that they have left. And so I think shortfalls in funding for the UN is a major factor. Big governments like, unfortunately, my own, the US, not paying their dues to the UN, forces UN agencies to be more reliant on corporations. And then there's also this increasing shift in the understanding about what the role of corporations in society is. And as I said earlier, this normalization of the idea of corporations being quote unquote partners in policymaking, which is ridiculous because we don't allow any other entity in society to self-regulate. If I commit a crime, well, first of all, I'm not allowed to write the rules on how to regulate crimes. And then if I commit a crime, I'm certainly not allowed to self-police and decide what my own sentence is. But that is the model of voluntary self-regulation that corporations have succeeded in normalizing at the international level and at the national level. So I'll leave it there. There are other aspects that I'm sure others will speak to.
Thank you, Shayda, for that powerful example of how corporate capture actually renders that which is illogical into a norm. Ana Maria, you had your hand up. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I was again reading to Felix's answers, which inspired me to comment. And he was mentioning how developed countries have opposed to rules that control these public-private partnerships and this kind of multi-stakeholder initiatives. We observed that also in the FAO. It was mainly Latin American countries opposing to very, very weak rules on private engagement. And in my personal experience, when speaking about these things with governments for example, in the Scandinavian countries, but also in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Switzerland, there is this believing that you can just rule the world if you cooperate with companies. This is a very Nordic centered logic, right? Very different to the emancipatory view of human rights, where the people have the power and not when you need to do alliances with the economic power to improve situations. And I think the fact that now in the US, this rule is considered a normality is a new act of colonization. It's the colonization of the idea that without companies, we cannot have a well-working world. And I think this is a colonization that comes from ages. For example, in the food sector, when I was 14, it was so fancy to go and eat in McDonald's or in JFK, in all these American junk food things. And they were like capturing our minds. And the problem is that if our minds are captured, imagine what can happen with our institutions. So that's why we need now a change of paradigm, but the good thing is that we are beginning, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Maria. I think I remember that time too, when going to an American fast food restaurant was basically like we were going to go to some fancy French restaurant when we were grown up. And we were basically paying a lot of money for not very healthy crap. Okay, I just wanted to ask a question to Ale because she's looking very shy, and I thought we should. Now she's smiling. Ale, do you think the 99% is fairly represented in the United Nations? And do you have a vision for how we can ensure this happens?
Ale, you're muted.
Let me press again.
Hi.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now you hear me. Okay. No, just to answer to your question, the answer is no, right? It's not fairly represented. And why we came to this comic is also to represent these voices, right? But you know, now that we are talking about the UN, what we are really talking is about multilateralism, right? And we are talking about that this multilateralism today is weak and is not responding to the demands and the needs of the people. But when we look in history, when the UN was created, and we look now, it's not only the private sector, you know, that is the new actor or growing actor. Also the movements are different. You know, the constituencies that we are talking about here have also changed in the way we organize collectively. You know, look at the LGBTI movement, look at the Black Women's Lives Matter, look at all the indigenous communities that have changed the constitution, right? In Ecuador, the movements in Bolivia, you know, I'm coming from a region where the movements are really, really, you know, vibrant, also with all the, you know, the backlash. But we have to look at, you know, how we pave the way, you know, from these local and territorial realities that have been proven to really tap, you know, on the needs during the COVID, right? In many of our territories, the private sector was not able to deliver. It was the communities, it was the neighbors, it was the alliances across trade unions, educators, you know, women's movements. So we are sustaining many of the needs of the communities while we await for the vaccines, you know, while we await for the yes of the pharmaceutical. So I would say that the UN needs to be, you know, alive, but for the purposes and the needs of the communities that are in the territories and local level. And the comic, it's an opportunity, an adaptation, you know, a way of educating on this, and also so that they use, you know, this comic to open other eyes and grow in this movement of strengthening the UN, but also our democracies and our states.
Thank you so much, Ale. And since I started the first question to Bobby, I'm going to also ask Bobby to round us off by sharing with us in this the farmers movement. But Bobby, you're still very much plugged in with global movements as well. What's your vision as to how we can overcome corporate capture in the UN system?
Thank you so much, Debbie. And I could totally echo what LA just said. And I think that one way which has definitely been there in the past is like some of us from the 99%, wherever we got that opportunity. For example, if you look at the UN, the WHO treaty on the tobacco treaty, for example, where civil society took leadership and, you know, mobilized governments, and especially the governments from the global south, to come together, you stand united and pass very progressive laws to kick out the tobacco industry from health policy making space. Or, for example, the governments which were working very closely with people and coalition led by pro people groups to demand liability, financial and legal liability from the tobacco corporations. Similar efforts led by corporate accountability. Shayda and I are a part of corporate accountability, and so there's so many other groups which are doing amazingly inspiring work within the UN space. But at the same time, we all know how corporate capture, just like a very bad virus, has really infected this UN system. But we need to go back to the charter, which basically says that, you know, that the human rights have to take primacy. And governments need to be reminded of the UN Charter. It is the governments which make up the UN. And I think the thing which I will not need to, I have to say this, is that also that people within nations, they have to, of course, they're organizing, but we all need to unite. And farmers movement is a great example where different communities, different religions, of course, it is led by farmers from Punjab and Haryana, but there's so many other groups which are also joining the protest side. So many, like some from different, if you look at the farmers movement and people who are there day and night, they come from so much diverse. Look at the diversity of the people they represented. Look at the leadership of women, for instance, in the whole whole of movement. So strengthening democratic spaces, public institutions and processes, and democracy, real democracy, the federal democracy within nations, as well as demanding that governments stand up to the people and human rights at the UN space, are definitely some of the ways I really envision that corporate capture and Corona both should be the past history.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And thank you, everyone, including the participants and also the attendees and the people who will be viewing this Facebook Live again in the future. I wanted to suggest to Mona and our host from ESCR-Net that please send the links to all these amazing resources, including the resources in the chat boxes when you send us the general follow-up email to all participants and attendees. Thank you so much, ESCR-Net, for starting this process, having this conversation, because we can't overcome corporate capture if we don't name it, and we need to name it, we need to expose it, and we need to resist it. And I hope this is a further step in our struggle and our fight. And we need to vaccinate the UN against the corporate capture virus before the virus mutates any further. And on that note, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, everybody. Stay safe and keep up the struggle.